Plato's Cave. A very, very powerful story. Well, not necessarily a story, but more of a visual aid to help us understand. And Plato is really famous for bringing Socrates to life. Socrates didn't write anything down, but was ultimately charged and convicted of sort of, I guess, tampering with the morals of the youth to some extent. But he was a philosopher, an educator, and it was more so about, I'm talking about Socrates, more so about the ignorance of pride. And now, what is it? What's it called? The Oracle of Delphi proclaimed that Socrates was the wisest man to ever live. And Socrates said that he was the wisest man because he confessed he didn't know nothing. But anyway, Socrates ultimately is wrongly convicted. A Jesus, 1,000 years before Jesus, to some extent, 500 years before Jesus. He's convicted, he's tried, he drinks the poison, hemlock. Plato comes along, and he begins to teach, and he's using this methodology of teaching and to help us understand. A different route, but still effective. He's not necessarily like Socrates, who's in the marketplace harassing those who think they know and don't. But Plato is teaching, and he's using this metaphor of a cave. And he says, imagine, if you would, three people looking at a wall. And they're in a cave, but they're in a cave staring at a wall. Their backs are toward the entrance. And so all they have to really understand life is to see the shadows that the sun makes. And so they are, sort of talking about life and examining life, but all they have to go on is the shadows. Now imagine if one of the people escaped and he went out and he was able to see the world and was able to the brightness of the sun for the first time. And he realizes that, well, wait a minute, those shadows are actually the manifestation of what happens when something passes before the sun. It's a shadow. It's not, you guys are analyzing life, but all you have is the shadows. This man has went outside, and now he's seen the sun, he's seen the brilliance of life, he's seen the trees for what they really are. He now understands. Because remember, before, all they saw were trees. All they saw were the shadows of people when they thought they were trees. But now he gets to see. So imagine if there's one person who escaped, went back, and he began to try to tell the others. And what do? They are so fascinated with the shadows and analyzing the shadows that they don't want to let that go. And so they begin to beat this man for coming back and telling them what he saw. And they branded it as ridiculous. And they beat him for what he had to say. And I think in many ways that's life. A lot of people are venturing out of the cave. The very thing that held you bound life is pushing you out of for some reason or another. We are venturing out into the real world where we can see some things for ourselves and not necessarily have to depend on the shadows and other people helping us understand what those shadows really are. Because remember, the captors want us to be in the cave, but in the cave in a peaceful way, in a non-confrontational way, a non-questioning way. And the moment we begin to question, and the moment we begin to analyze, we begin to realize that we are going against the grain of those who own and control the cave. And so, what's the moral of the story? The moral of the story is that those individuals were willing to kill their friend because he was telling them the truth of what he saw. And they had only experienced the shadows. And therefore, they wanted to maintain that grip on reality, which is, the control of their environment in terms of, we know exactly what it is out there. We don't need to go out there. We don't need to turn our back and look at the entrance or the exit. We're going to look here with our backs against the wall, and we're going to stare at this cave wall. We're going to stare at this wall of the cave. And so then we'll be able to pontificate about the shadows. And anybody who tells us that there's more to life becomes our enemy. And so I want to tell you, my brothers and sisters, that there's more to life. I too was in that cave. I ventured into that cave looking for meaning. Ended up on my knees staring at a wall, trying to understand the shadows. But God says, your existence is much deeper than that. And if you really want to know what's behind the shadows, understand that you are going to have to fight of your life. The fight of your life. Most of us have thought we've been in fights, but you have not fought until you fight for the right to understand the environment in which you live. What's real and what's not. Plato, maybe 2,500 years ago, was trying to help us understand higher thought, higher consciousness, a Christ consciousness that later comes, and there's an understanding, but I don't think that the writings of Plato or the writings of Socrates or the writings of Aristotle or Pythagoras, I don't think those things are things that we should be afraid of. Plato says everything he learned, it was either Plato or Aristotle, or Pythagoras, everything they learned they got from Egypt.